Welcome to this week's assembly. I've got some questions to start off with. Firstly, would you say you're a reliable person? What about your friends? Are they reliable? Have your mums or dads ever asked you to do some jobs to help out at home? And did you do them? This week, I'm going to tell you a story about a man who had two sons called John and William. One day, the dad went up to John's bedroom where he found John making his Lego pirate ship. And Dad said to him, "John, it was very windy during the night. There are lots of leaves down in the garden. Would you be able to rake them up and put them in the garden bin, please? Because I've got to go out for a while." And John said, "Oh, Dad, I don't want to do it really. I want to finish my Lego pirate ship. I hope to finish it today." Dad said, "Okay." And he went downstairs where William was watching telly. And Dad said to William the same thing. "William, there's loads of leaves in the garden. Do you think you could rake them up and put them in the garden bin while I'm out for a while?" "Oh yeah, Dad, I'll do that. No problem," said William. "Great," said Dad. "I'll leave the rake and the gloves in the garden." And off he went. Well, after he'd gone, John thought about what his dad had asked him, and he thought, well, I could rake the leaves because I'd still have time to do my Lego pirate ship. And so he went. He went outside and was raking them up and putting them in the bin. And after a while, his dad returned and John had almost finished. "Oh, John," said Dad, "great job. Well done. But where's William?" "Last time I saw him, he was watching telly." And so Dad went in the living room, and sure enough, there was William watching the telly. Now, which of those sons do you think pleased the dad? John, who said, "No, I don't want to rake up the leaves," but then went and done it. Or William that said, "Oh yeah, I'll rake the leaves," but never did anything. Well, Jesus told a story very similar. It's known as the parable of the two sons. And in Jesus' parable, it was similar to my story, where a dad asked two sons to go and work in the vineyard. The first son said no, but later he changed his mind and went. The second son said, "Yes, I'll do that," but never went and ended up doing nothing at all. What Jesus is saying there is that what we do is more important than what we say we will do. It's important to keep our word. If we say we're going to do something, we should do it. Are you good at keeping promises? Jesus was reminding us that making promises is easier than actually keeping our promises. Have you ever been in a situation where no one would actually know whether you kept your promises or not? This is a true story about Abraham Lincoln, who was one of the first presidents of America. It was some years ago, many years ago in fact, and him and President Lincoln and a colonel were on a journey riding on horseback. It was some miles long. And after a while, as they were walking along together on their horses, the colonel pulled out a bottle of whiskey from his pocket and said, "Mr. Lincoln, would you like to share some whiskey with me?" "No, thank you," said the president. "I don't drink whiskey." So the colonel had a couple of sips, put it back in his pocket, and they carried on. After a little bit further along on the journey, the colonel got two cigars out of his pocket and said, "Mr. Lincoln, you didn't want to drink with me, but would you like to share a cigar with me?" And the president said, "You are a very friendly gentleman, a great travelling companion, and I would love to share a drink with you, a smoke with you rather. But before I do, let me tell you something that happened to me when I was a boy. I was 9 years old and my mum was very ill. In fact, she was dying. And she was in her bed and she called me into her bedroom and said, 'Sit on the bed, Abie.' I've got something to ask you. And she said, the doctors have said that I'm never going to recover from this illness. And I was going to ask you if you would promise me something before I die. Would you promise never to drink whiskey or to smoke tobacco for the rest of your life? And Abraham Lincoln said, I did promise that to Mum. And till this time, I've kept that promise. Now, Colonel, I'd like some advice from you. Do you think I should break that promise? And the Colonel said, no, you shouldn't. I wouldn't want you to break that promise for the whole world. I wish I'd made a promise like that to my mum and kept it. Do you remember that we've said during our assemblies that a parable is a short story teaching a moral or a spiritual truth? Now, we've looked at the moral aspect of it. Now let's look at the spiritual. What did Jesus mean by his story of the two sons spiritually? Well, the first son that said he wouldn't go and work in the vineyard but did, represents people who don't believe in God but change their minds and start believing and following him. And the second son stands for people who say they believe in God but don't actually do anything about it. The Bible talks a lot about faith and deeds, or faith and works. And what it teaches is that if we believe in God, then that should make a difference to our lives. It should affect how we act, that we should be caring, loving, kind, thoughtful, helpful to other people, and so on. Lots of the qualities that you have in your school values. The parable Jesus told teaches us that God doesn't want people to be like the second son, who makes out they're someone that they're not, who says they're going to do something but doesn't. Because the second son sort of makes a false image for himself. He's saying that he's one thing, but really he isn't, and he lets his father down. The second son ends up helping his dad. Do you know what the word authentic means? What about the word genuine? Those two words mean true, reliable, and honest. And Abraham Lincoln, the man who I was telling you about a minute or two ago, he said this: character is like a tree, reputation is like the shadow of a tree. The shadow is what we think it is like, but the tree is the real thing. And are we the real thing? Before I tell you a true story of someone who made a promise to God, I'd like you for a minute to think about your name. Because in this story, names are important, as you'll see. Now, before you were born, your mums and dads thought a lot about what name they were going to call you, because it's important that we call a baby a good name, because the name's going to stay with them for the rest of their lives. They probably said that name over and over again to make sure it was right. They perhaps told family or close friends what they were thinking of calling you. They might have got two names for a boy or a girl if they didn't know what you were going to be. They wanted to make sure your name was special, that it matched with your surname, because they didn't want you to be teased. Once there was a politician who called his daughter Ima. This is true. His surname was Hogg. Can you imagine what teasing she had at school? What about if your surname is Green? I hope your mum didn't call you Teresa if you're a girl. Anyway, your mums and dads wanted a name that would be special. Some names have special meanings. Well, every name has a meaning, and your mums or dads might have thought about the meaning of your name. For example, Charlotte means free. Sarah means princess. Leo means brave. David means loved. Alice means noble. My own name, Gary, means warrior or defender. so I hope I help people. Well, there's a story in the Bible about a woman whose name was Hannah. Now, Hannah means God is gracious. But I shouldn't think that Hannah thought that God was very gracious to her and wondered why her parents called her that name. Because Hannah and her husband couldn't have children. And this was the one thing that Hannah really wanted, a son. And she couldn't understand why God had prevented her from having a son. And so she kept praying about it, asking God to give her her dream. And one day she was in the temple praying. And she was praying by moving her lips. There were no words. And she was crying out to God. She was praying that God would look down on her in her sadness and take that sadness away and let her have a son. And she said, God, if only you would let me have a son, I will give him back to you so that he can serve you for the rest of his life. Now, there was a priest called Eli there, and he'd been watching Hannah, and he thought she was drunk. So he went up to her and said, why are you drinking in the temple? And she said, I'm not drunk. I haven't had any drink. I'm just praying to God. I'm crying out to him, asking him to give me what I really want and telling him how I feel. And Eli said, go in peace. May God grant you what you have asked for. Guess what? God did grant Hannah's request. She did give birth to a son and called him Samuel. Do you know what Samuel means? It means asked of God. And because God heard and answered Hannah's prayer, she was faithful to keep her promise. And when Samuel was old enough, she took him to the temple where he worked and served God by helping Eli, the priest. Hannah kept her promise to God. When we make promises to God and other people, do we keep them? Are we like Hannah and President Lincoln, faithful in keeping our promises? I'd just like to say a final prayer. If you agree with it, make it your own, you can say amen at the end. Heavenly Father, please help us to be reliable. Please help us to be the tree, not the shadow. Help us to be faithful in keeping our promises like Hannah was. Amen. Well, that's the end of the assembly, but I'm just going to do a little quiz in case you've got time for it. I have 8 questions based on the assembly this morning. You can do them in teams, have odd numbers versus even numbers, or you can do them all. So I'll read the list of questions and then I'll give you the answers. Question 1, my first story. What job did the dad ask John and William to do? Question 2, what was John doing in his room when his dad asked him to help? And 3, what was William still doing when his dad came home to check on how they were getting on? Number 4, in Jesus' parable, what job did the father ask the 2 sons to do? Question 5, what 2 things did Abraham Lincoln promise his mum he would never do? And the final story, question 6, what did Hannah ask God for? Question 7, this is a hard one. What was the name of the priest? And finally, number 8, what name did Hannah give to her son? Okay, I hope you've done well. I'll run through the answers quickly. Question 1, it was rake leaves. Question 2, John was making a Lego pirate ship, or you could put doing Lego. William, question 3, was watching TV. Question 4, Jesus' parable, the job was to help in the vineyard. Number 5, the 2 things Abraham Lincoln promised not to do was drink alcohol or whiskey and smoke. Number 6, Hannah asked God for a son. Number 7, Eli was the name of the priest. And finally, number 8, Hannah called her son Samuel. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the assembly this week, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye. Bye.